Hello. Good morning, everyone. Lights are on, so I think it's time to kick off. We have a wonderful panel today, and we are going to discuss privacy and new technologies. I'm Peter from the Council of Europe. I will be the moderator for this panel. As you may know, Council of Europe is an international organization with more than 200 conventions on many aspects, many areas. The last one is on one of our last conventions is on AI, AI Framework Convention, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. In the natural course of action, during the existence of this organization, if anything required a regulatory or a policy response, usually the competent committee was issuing an opinion, and then the opinion was turned into some soft law measures, and then like a guidance or guidelines, then was taken up by the Committee of Ministers, issuing recommendations which were binding for the member states, and then it ended up to being or drafting conventions on important things. As I mentioned, this is how it happened also with AI lately. But where we are exactly on privacy, new technologies are used and are deployed in a pace which was never experienced before. And privacy is a concept that we have like for 75 years, and the European Convention on Human Rights in its Article 8 already enshrined the right to privacy for all individuals. But how we are coping with these standards? Are there international standards with regard to new technologies? Are they delivered in a timely manner? Are they any good? Are they used? Or are they referred to? So this is what we will discuss here with the panel. And I am very happy to introduce you the first panelist, Anna Maria Mladic, who is the head of sector for EU international cooperation and legal affairs at the Croatian Data Protection Authority, bringing over a decade of experience in the field of data protection. In 2024, Anna Maria was elected vice chair of the Committee of Convention 108, one of the committee I refer to. This is Committee on Data Protection, and the oldest the Council of Europe dedicated to the protection of human rights, which unites 46 member states from broader European region. She actively contributes to the work of European Data Protection Board as well, and serves as the project manager for ARC2 project, whose flagship outcome is Olivia, web-based tool designed to support SME in achieving GDPR compliance. Anna Maria, what is happening within the Committee of Convention 108 when it comes to new technologies?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Peter, for this lovely introduction. This is my first time at CPDP. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you for inviting me to discuss about these fascinating topics. I will just briefly additionally introduce myself. I have been working at Croatian the Data Protection Authority for more than 10 years, and my daily work involves giving legal advice to data controllers on how to comply with the GDPR, delivering trainings to DPOs and SMEs, assessing data protection impact assessments and legitimate interest assessments, and recently giving advice to Croatian AI developers and providers on how to comply with the data protection legal framework. As you mentioned, in 2024, I was elected as vice chair of Committee of Convention 108 of the Council of Europe. It is truly an honor to be able to contribute to the work of Council of Europe, one of the oldest international organizations, a very prominent organization that for more than 75 years is dedicated to the protection of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Council of Europe has been pioneer in the field of personal data protection, and since 1981, Convention for the Protection of Individuals with regard to automatic processing of personal data, known as Convention 108, has been the first and only legally binding instrument at international level in the field of personal data protection. It is also important to mention that Convention 108 has established the fundamental principles of data protection, which were later integrated into the national legal systems of EU member states, afterwards into so-called data protection directive, which preceded the GDPR. Convention 108 had significant influence on GDPR. Afterwards, GDPR inspired adoption of data protection laws all over the world. So in 2011, there were 76 countries with data protection laws worldwide, and in 2025, there are 172 countries with data protection laws. However, we still lack a globally adopted convention, globally adopted legally binding convention. Convention 108 is now outdated. We have modernized the Convention 108 in 2018, and now it is called Convention 108 Plus to keep pace with new technologies, with evolving digital landscape, to facilitate free flow of data and to build bridges between continents and legal regimes. To date, Convention 108 Plus has been ratified by 33 states. We still miss 5 countries for the Convention 108 Plus to enter into force. And when we talk about GDPR, we refer to the GDPR as gold standard, but this gold standard is not reachable at global level, while Convention 108 Plus offers principles that are easily adaptable. Convention 108 Plus offers solutions that are workable, that are good enough, that are workable in different contexts. And we are convinced that Convention 108 Plus has this potential to become a globally accepted binding legal instrument in the field of personal data protection. When we talk about international regulation, introducing international standards, the crucial role has Committee of the Convention 108 and Bureau of the Committee of Convention 108. So we have now in a very advanced stage of development of guidelines on data protection in the context of neurosciences. We will work on these guidelines with the experts. One of them is Marcello, who will talk about these guidelines in details a little bit later. We also started our work on guidelines on privacy risks and mitigating measures in large language models, together with experts, Muriel, who is here, our panelist, and Isabel Barbera in the first row. We will try to translate principles, data protection principles and privacy principles outlined in Convention 108 Plus into specific LLM guidelines and best practices. These guidelines will provide competent data protection authorities and organizations developing and deploying large language models with a coherent risk management framework to manage privacy risks. So the goal of these guidelines is to help organizations to manage privacy risks across the 4 key phases of large language models: model development, deployment of AI systems, and user interaction, and then autonomous agentic workflows. In these guidelines, we're also planning to address risks arising from AI model itself, for example, using sensitive training data, remembering personal data, then hallucinations, and risks arising from AI systems, meaning risks that arise when model is deployed and how users interact with this model or better to say system. So we have one very recent example. 2 days ago, Italian Data Protection Authority has published Guarantee Privacy that they have issued, that they have imposed a fine to Luca, a company that developed chatbot Replica. There are many reasons for this very significant fine, but one of the reasons is that they didn't implement appropriate age verification mechanisms. So even minors were able to use Replica, and minors were exposed to sexual content, to inappropriate content, and Replica was giving advice to minors and vulnerable people. And from this example, we can see the risks to human rights and freedoms arising from using AI systems. These guidelines that Muriel and Isabella are developing together with Committee of Convention 108 will also offer approach to privacy impact assessments and also to mitigating measures, how to mitigate and reduce the risks, including privacy enhancement technologies, federated learning, differential privacy, homomorphic encryption, fine-tuning techniques, and so on. So it is important to mention then implementing privacy by design and privacy enhancement technologies in each phase of AI life cycle is crucial. It is crucial to address risk proactively rather to fix them retroactively. Additionally, I would also like to mention that large language models present significant privacy and data protection risks, including data breaches, personal data exposure, hallucinations, manipulations with AI-generated outputs. Attackers can reconstruct input according to by analyzing AI models' input. Then AI models can unintentionally reveal personal data. Furthermore, here we have issues with lack of transparency, lack of user control, problems with issues with that users are not able to understand how their personal data has been processed in large language models. In addition, large language models have great potential to interfere with broader right to private life. This includes risks to our personal autonomy, risks related to reputational harm, risks related to our control or to our ability to control our digital presence. So there is one well-known example from Germany. There was one German journalist whose job was to report about crimes. And when he asked Microsoft Copilot about who he is, then LLM responded that he is a fraudster preying on crying widows, escapee from psychiatric institution, convicted criminal, child molester, and so on. And when he asked this LLM to give his address, then LLM gave correct address and direction to his home. So from this example, it is very visible how his right to private life, in fact, has been violated. Finally, I would like to mention that for our guidelines that Muriel and Isabel are developing together with Bureau and Committee of Convention 108, it is very important to engage with stakeholders. Experts will carry out research, will carry out interviews with companies who are developing, who are deploying LLMs, with regulators, because it is very important to gain deeper insights into the issues that all of them are facing when they are trying to protect privacy in large language models. Also, a certain number of organizations will be selected to test this risk management framework that we are going to develop. And then according to the feedback of stakeholders, this methodology is going to be improved to make sure that it will work in practice. So AI is a very broad concept. In these guidelines, we are just going to concentrate on large language models, which fall into category of generative AI, which is currently the most popular, the most widespread technology. But it is also important to highlight that all AI systems that are processing personal data in the stage of development, in the whole life cycle, AI life cycle, must be in line with the principles outlined in Convention 108+. At the first place, lawfulness, fairness, transparency, effective risk management, privacy by design, by default, data security, purpose limitation, and specification proportionality. To conclude, we definitely need international regulation of data protection and new technologies at international level. Council of Europe offers balanced, workable regulatory framework that upholds human rights and at the same time fosters innovation. I am talking about Convention 108+ and Framework Convention on Artificial Intelligence, Human Rights, Democracy, and the Rule of Law, which was adopted and opened for signature in 2024 to all countries worldwide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna Maria. I'm turning to our next speaker, Cathal McDermott, who is an Assistant General Counsel in the Privacy, Safety and Regulatory Affairs team at Microsoft, leading a team working on European legal regulatory issues, including AI and privacy. Cathal has over a decade of experience leading privacy and regulatory legal work in Europe and internationally for global technology companies. Prior to Microsoft, he led European legal teams at Dropbox, Red Hat, and practiced privacy law in Dublin. Cathal, is this something that what Anna Maria just described speaks to you? And this is something, what are you doing in your daily work? You are advising on privacy, safety, and regulatory affairs about and with regard to new technology, which brings enormous benefit and for our society, for our economy as well. But how do you see at Microsoft, what are your daily work, and whether you have any connection with international regulation?
Sure, thank you, Peter. And I'll just say thank you firstly to CPDP for having us at this important event. I think, you know, it's certainly an honor to be in a room like this and explaining these types of topics and what we do in our day-to-day life. I think, you know, the topic here really is privacy and new technologies with a specific focus on neurotech and, you know, really how this interfaces with AI and data protection, especially in the new era we have around generative AI and large language models. I think I'd like to set the scene a little bit firstly and just mention that everything we're doing and folks in this room are partnering here as industry innovators, partnerships with governments, AI leaders, and privacy regulators. And it's important that we try and create a future which shapes innovation, but which keeps an eye on regulatory intervention where necessary and responsible AI development. We're already seeing, of course, every part of our world being shaped by AI. We see operations more efficient within medical realm. We see new businesses generating and inspiring, I think, new revenue streams coming from AI. And of course, there's a very interesting new development from the research labs where neurotechnology is moving across out of research labs and into commodified worlds, such as into consumer applications and commercial applications. We in the private sector with Microsoft, we understand very much that you know, AI is an extremely transformative force. I particularly have been working across AI and with in league with lots of our AI regulators and AI development internally at Microsoft for you know, it's probably about almost 2 years at this stage, and I'm working very closely with our European regulators and of course trying to ensure that we help shape in a responsible way the future of AI regulation. So with that said, I think, you know, we're always trying at Microsoft to get ahead of the game. We understand that the legal framework is not always keeping pace with the technological development. I mean, I think that's just something which is always seen when it comes to technology. It's not unique to AI, but I think it's certainly at a new pace with AI. There has been a patchwork development of laws, especially around neurotechnology, and I think we can speak a little more about that on a global level. But it couldn't be said today that there's any framework specifically for neurotechnology. Different countries have been forward-leaning, and the GDPR may indeed cover some of this under biometric and health data, sensitive data. However, it's not one size fits all. There are lots of important interventions, as my panelists just mentioned, from the Council of Europe and Convention 108+, but also from regulators who are trying to anticipate the risks in this area. So we've seen, for example, in 2023, the ICO come out with a report around neurotechnologies, where it tries to understand what's happening today, and this is a large part of it. It's the education and the understanding of what's currently on market, what's currently happening out there, where these consumer applications and commercial applications are moving towards, and the risks around that. And I think both the neurotechnology report from under Convention 108+ and the ICO spotted a number of risk areas which it's important to be very, very mindful of. A couple of these are what you'd expect really when it comes to any type of risk assessments, especially now in this new era of AI. But we look at things like the potential for bias and discrimination in data sets. The ICO specifically called this out, so that if neurotechnology is working through biased data sets, or indeed there's inappropriate inferences drawn, that's really going to disfavor a number of specific type of people across a number of different types of surface areas, and that can include very much neurodivergent people. Also, interestingly, when you look in an employment context, the types of potential for neurotechnology here could be an application to really have more workplace surveillance and understand, what workers are operating at what levels. It could also look to make inappropriate inferences about their state of mind when they're at work. And I think, the ICO correctly drew out this thread a little bit, that if you have an ingrained understanding of a particular state of work that an employer wants to see at their work, and an employee doesn't match up to that because of some neurotechnology consumer application or wearable application which we see on the market, that can really lead to unfavorable results for the employer and indeed the employee, who may not be, or who may be passed over for promotions, those types of things. It's worth, as I mentioned, we can't always wait for the legislation to catch up. Private companies, and indeed Microsoft, we've been working with responsible AI for a long, long time. We have a responsible AI standard, which is really the blueprint which is used to help guide our engineers when they're building AI systems, models. And that's set around 6 different principles, and those principles include a lot of what we talk about and what we see going forward as the risks which have been called out by regulators around neurotechnology. So I'll try and recall the principles here, but we have fairness, we have inclusiveness, we have reliability and safety, we have privacy and security, and then they latch onto the basis of accountability and transparency. Got there. But fairness is the first one there. And what we do at Microsoft, for instance, when we're building our responsible AI and working through that responsible AI program, we ensure that we look into the data sets which are being used to build some of our first-party products, and we look into understand whether there's specific types or data sets who will be impacted negatively. We understand the types of processing, we understand the algorithmic computing used, and we try and really probe and test and retest the algorithms and the structure of what we're doing to ensure that the negative outcomes, to ensure that there are no negative outcomes for a specific group of people. And we've been doing that, and that's the guidance, that's the North Star, the blueprint that our engineering teams have. We run all of these types of tests for fairness, for inclusiveness, right across the AI life cycle when we're developing products. So that really is, sort of from the very beginning to the very end of our development cycle. And we ask and have a standard set of questions which we ask to our engineers to try and elicit responses which would indicate any potential negative effects. We have those as central tooling within Microsoft, so they're really passed around every time we go through these types of sensitive use discussions within Microsoft. So I think, it certainly behooves companies like ourselves who are developing and in a particular place where we're developing this type of technology, which is out there and used very widely across businesses. We need to ensure our customers and indeed ourselves are deploying and creating technology which can be used responsibly, which is worthy of trust, and indeed which upholds these principles right across the board. And I think when we talk a little bit later perhaps about how to embed legislation or what legislation would be appropriate for this area, I think it is worth remembering that a lot of good work has been done already. GDPR, of course, is the bedrock for all of these. We understand that the AI Act is not replacing GDPR. It's GDPR and the AI Act. A lot of the principles there around transparency, fairness, are already baked into GDPR. We also, of course, have the AI Act, which has prohibited the prohibited practices, and Microsoft once again has restricted uses since 2020 which map onto the early AI Act prohibited practices. So I think, partnership, not waiting for legislation, being responsible when you're in a position where you're deploying and creating this type of new technology outside of neurotechnology, but neurotechnology being a very important new brand of personal data. I'm happy to speak a little more about that as we go.
Thank you so much. Next speaker is Muriel Popa-Fabre. So I know you are wearing several hats, and I think the best to introduce you is that you are with responsible AI policies and governance in France. You are advising companies, but also the government, how to deal with new technologies and LLMs, but you are also associated with businesses in the other side of the Atlantic. So how in your work you are dealing with these issues that pertains to new technology and privacy?
Thank you. So I've prepared a little bit of images for you to understand to what extent the fact that we are in 2025 is actually the best moment in order to talk about LLMs and privacy risks, because the technology is now really operational, and we are been starting to see the predictive potential of this technological structures and infrastructures. So I'm going to share 5 main elements that are here to put forward to what extent now is the moment to talk about privacy, not before, when one was freezing in front of just the technology that was unbelievably adaptable and interactional. So my first point is to say that there is a good news, is that since last year we start to have a new observability on these systems, and especially for large language models, the black box paradigm is fading out. And we can now start to observe what is compressed inside. And typically, if you take inner conflict as a term, you can now have an idea of what was compressed around this term during the training of a production model like Claude in this case, and to what extent it is a sophisticated amount of information that is compressed around this term. And what is really interesting is that researchers have been extracting these features halfway of the training of the transformer model that is embedded inside the Claude tool. And especially they've been trying to see when this feature activates. So if we take a feature that was found statistically, that is the feature of Margaret Thatcher, with this code in yellow you see on the screen, you can track when it's activated. And interestingly, you can track and you see when it's orange, it's activated, when it's red, it's super activated, different levels of activations. And interestingly, you see there's the age, there's Downing Street, there is a period in time, there is UK, there is the fact that she's associated with change. So we are starting to have new ways in order to see what is actually embedded and compressed inside these tools, which gives new governance to this, especially if we think in terms of personal features here. The other main element I would like to stress is that we are facing a situation where these technological artifacts have new predictability capacities. And it's interesting because they're very good at predicting and simulating behavioral data. Here is a study that came out 3 days before presidential election in the United States, predicting the results. And interestingly, the prediction was very good, and it was just based on a simulation where you were giving personas through basic prompting, no big computer science there. And you could, through demographics of the World Value Survey, you could simulate the vote, and together with adding some prediction from American national election studies of the 2 preceding presidential elections. So this is interesting because it sums up with the fact that there is new ways of fusing multimodality inside these architectures. And this is an interesting, it's one of the first research studies from Walmart showing to what extent when you put as an input and you have a special training, here is much more computer science oriented, it's not just prompting, when you put together the visual features of the product, the textual description of the product, and the user interaction history, meaning how many helmets and bicycle helmets you're viewing, which one are you finally buying, exactly in what sequence, you end up in having an incredible prediction rate that is augmenting actually the accuracy of what's the next buy, that is the unicorn shorty you see there to cycle, and you augment it by 43% in the sport category and 38% in the electronics recommendations. So you see that having the possibility to aggregate multimodal information about the behavior of persons on an e-commerce platform has a huge potential of predicting behavior. And another way to predict behavior is to use agents that have as let's say engine inside an LLM. And this is a nice study by Stanford that is showing that if you give a 2-hour interview of 1,000 individuals, and you create out of this interview, you give it to an agent that is going to answer questions on social science surveys, psychology, you know, the big 5 personality inventory, and economic games, behavioral experiments, you end up in having a very high accuracy of predicting what are the answers, the real answers of these 1,000 people, just having the agent do it after having absorbed this 2 hours interview. But what is really interesting here in this study is not only that 2 hours interview is enough in order to simulate with a great accuracy more than 175 questions about your habits, but it's actually if you give just the demographics, which is the 3rd row on the screen, just the demographics, that is very basic, no conversational aspect, just basic information, to the AI agent, you still get a very good prediction of this general survey, social survey, 175 questions and answers, of course. So it's interesting to understand that this potential of simulating human behavior that is embedded inside these structures, these technological architectures, is really changing a lot the recommender systems. So that we have a hybrid system that integrate LLM and agents as a simulator and then do the recommendation. So it means that now you can broaden the scope and not only make better prediction, but you can broaden the scope of a recommended system. So you can put together not only multimodal data, not only interaction history, but brand affinity, taste, preferences, habits, idiosyncrasies, dietary style, and you can make the recommended system much more proactive. And this is something I would like to stress as an important element that is important to understand in privacy, is to what extent this proactiveness and this prediction capability of human behavior that is enabled by the fact that a large language model has compress so much information, can compress multimodal information, we need to find a way in order to find new ways to have risk assessment that understands this aspect of privacy and of prediction of human behavior. So I would like to finish just to show you my sixth argument before moving to some elements that show that you can embed brain data inside LLMs, to show you that actually patterns are not only a matter of just having something stable. These systems are highly adaptable, and that's why generative AI is really making the difference currently in robotics, because there is a shift from next word predictions in very basic terms, let's say, to next move prediction. And so I won't be able to show you all the nice little videos that you can go and check on the internet on a platform that is called Hugging Face, but you can definitely, only with 100 examples of folding a t-shirt, automate the process. And what is really incredible is that you can, in just 6 months, you get to a very adaptable system like this. I don't know if I can make the video start. If you can click, I'm not sure I can do it here. And that's the last argument of these structures, is that they are highly adaptable. Not only they can fuse multimodality, they can predict to a wider extent, they can embed so much knowledge so that you can have prediction of elections, given demographics, these kind of things. But whatever moment you disrupt the thing, it can start again exactly at the same point and just make the whole movement. So this is just to give you a visual intuition of what is adaptability thanks to reinforcement learning and generative AI models. So I would like you to bridge all this information and project it on all the information that is around a simple smartphone. Because that's the question of privacy, right? Now that we can fuse everything together, that we can predict to a bigger extent, that we have high adaptability, we are facing the fact that just your telephone is a source of multimodal information and behavioral prediction that is incredible. I'm not going to detail everything that is on the screen, but this has been true for the last 10 years. Like smartphones have been used since 2016 in order to track psychiatric patients, because you could check when they were going at doctor appointments, you could check through a smartwatch what was their anxiety, if they were going to have a seasonal disorder, given the light sensor, if they were under medication because of pupil dilatation, if they were under medication because of the way they were swiping on the screen. You can have a lot of information out of it. But now you can also put all this information inside a technological artifact that has a high prediction capacity. And that's my bridge to the brain. It was a virtual one I wanted to do, but actually last week there was the first announcement of an Apple teaming up with a brain-computer startup interface with intracranial implants. And that's exactly the thing, is that brain data are going to be treated by LLMs. And the last thing I'd like you to understand is that you don't need that much technological work in order to enter brain images inside a prompt, which is a paper that was just out in March, showing that if you have a text prompt, you're making people listen to the beginning of the sentence and the end of the sentence. So here on the left, shorter jackets are on, and then you take the brain information of the person listening to the cutting edge of wedding fashion for men. You transform the brain information of the people listening to cutting edge of wedding fashion for men. You extract those features, you transform them in a way that it can enter the prompt of a large language model, Llama 2. You put together shorter jackets are on in textual terms, plus the final part of the sentence with brain terms, so brain embedding, and then you get a translation in natural language that has a high match or a gist match. You have two possibilities. It's not perfect, but you can get to decode what the person has been listening, just with inserting this brain embeddings inside a prompt. So that's where I would like to leave you in order to see what are all the challenges that are ahead. Actually, not so ahead. They are here now. And thank you for your attention.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. It's very, very complex. I am turning to Marcello Jenka, who is joining us online. Marcello, you are with the TUM School of Medicine and Health in Munich, and you have been researching neuroscience for decades. But you are now engaged in international legislation, not only with the Council of Europe, but with other international organizations as well. We heard, Cathal, that neuroscience is an area where we don't have necessarily a lot of references, a lot of standards so far. So where we are, according to you, as well, what your daily work consists of?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to participate in this important event, and apologize for not being able to be there in person due to conflicting teaching commitments. So I'll probably start from where Muriel ended her presentation. So what is special about brain data, and why are we talking about brain data, or more extensively neural data, at a privacy conference? And the main reason for that is that historically the brain has remained a black box. So we could understand what kind of input come to the brain, so sensory, visual, and other inputs, and what comes out in the form of behavioral output, which is basically our actions or our speech and so on. But we couldn't understand what was going on inside of the brain because we simply lacked the technologies that could allow to understand in real time those processes. And now we have this big family of so-called neurotechnologies that enable this kind of real-time monitoring and potentially modulation of brain activity. Now, this is a technological trend that is revolutionizing medicine in particular, because it originated in the clinical sector, and it's extremely helpful to provide new treatment opportunities and new diagnostic opportunities for the billions of people worldwide who suffer from disorders of the brain and mind. Based on the most recent estimates, we know that 1 in 3 people alive today is going to experience at least one neurological condition through their lifetime. And it is predicted that 1 in 2 is going to experience at least one mental health condition throughout their lifetime. And unfortunately, we cannot cure what we cannot understand, and we cannot understand what we cannot measure. So we should welcome the introduction of technologies that can measure brain activity in order to better understand how the brain works, and provide viable solutions for the billions of people in need worldwide. But at the same time, we should acknowledge that the brain is not an organ like any other. It is the fundamental coordinating center of vital functions like respiration, blood circulations, and so on. In fact, we ascribe the thin line between life and death in many world jurisdictions based on neurological parameters, and we call it brain death. But most importantly, the brain is the CPU, is the central processing unit of the mind. So all those things that we commonly believe that make us humans, like consciousness, language, emotions, memory, intentions, and so on, they are fundamentally processed, albeit not exclusively in the brain. And so if we can reveal information about the brain and from the brain, this is a highly sensitive information and highly private information. According to some, it is the most private information we have. And as we heard in the previous presentation, artificial intelligence is really revolutionizing the readability of brain data. So for a long time, we could record brain activity. We have some neurotechnological techniques like electroencephalography that are nearly a century old now. But for a long time, we could read those signals in a very limited manner. AI models, especially those based on deep learning, things like GANs, transformers, and diffusion models, are extremely powerful at revealing sensitive information from neural activity, including information that can be used to infer mental states. So people's intentions or preferences, for example. This, again, is very useful information in the clinics. For example, it can be used to power speech neuroprosthesis that can allow people with aphasia, with an acquired inability to speak, to produce audible speech. And we are now seeing the first clinical applications of this incredible technology. But at the same time, this is also a technology that can easily be misused in the consumer sector, because as we know, all our data economy is basically predicated upon the desire to predict a person's intentions, a person's preferences, and understand what it's in people's minds. So what happens if we can now do this in a quite sophisticated way and a much more direct way than what we can do if we rely only on behavioral data, for example, from our online behavior. And there are two privacy problems that arise here. So one problem is what we call the neuroprivacy problem. So the risk that neural data can be used to infer neurological conditions or predictors thereof, and that this information is shared in unsecured ways. So for example, what happens if my health insurance provider or my employer has access to information that reveals my probability to develop dementia or schizophrenia. And this is a problem, a privacy problem that is very near to the problem that we already have, for example, in the context of genetic information. So neural data, just like genetic data, are highly predictive of present and future health status and potential behavior. But then there's also a new privacy problem, which is the problem that often goes under the name of mental privacy or mind reading, and we can discuss whether this metaphor is useful or not. But the mental privacy problem is that is moving a step forward, and it's about reconstructing the content of mental states from the decoding of neural activity. And this is a new technological capability that is really emerging out of increased enhanced performance of both neurotechnology and artificial intelligence for neural data processing. This is a more pervasive privacy problem because it is not just about revealing information about biomarkers, which again is something that we can obtain also from other sources, but also it's a more extensive access into a person's brain and mind domain. Now, what is the challenge for governance? It is, on the one hand, to facilitate neuroscience research and its translation into clinical applications without introducing unnecessary obstacles to the processing of data, especially in the cross-national context. Because now neuroscience projects are highly limited in terms of data readability. And at the same time, we need to limit and prevent the misuse of neural data in the consumer space in the context of applications such as psychographic profiling, which is now based on behavioral data and can be soon based on much more sophisticated data coming directly from brain signatures, cognitive surveillance, and exploitation of cognitive vulnerabilities. So neural data can be used to reveal cognitive vulnerabilities that in turn can be used to implement exploitative and manipulative dynamics. So what are organizations doing in order to mitigate these risks? So the first organization that attempted to develop standards, international standards in this domain, was the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which released in 2019 a recommendation on responsible innovation in neurotechnology. and is now producing a toolkit to facilitate compliance among industry actors. Other organizations are focusing primarily on human rights protection, and this is what the UNESCO is attempting to do with the establishment of an ad hoc expert group, which drafted a recommendation on the ethics of neurotechnology, which is now being negotiated by governments. And last but not least, the organization that you represent, Peter, the Council of Europe, has been working in this space for many years, as you well know. And the committee, a part of the Convention 108, has given myself and Eduardo Bertoni the task to produce a report and now guidelines for interpreting Convention 108 and Convention 108 Plus in the light of emerging neurotechnologies and neuro AI enabled decoding of brain activity. And what we're attempting to do here is to provide a viable and clear, transparent, and disambiguous interpretation of the emerging challenges that neuro AI-based processing of neural data raises, while at the same time avoiding the introduction of unnecessary obstacles into data processing that could restrict and limit the benefits of neuroscience research. And this is something urgent because we are now in a time where a lot of organizations worldwide are attempting to regulate neural data, sometimes in a way that is a bit detached from science and the scientific community. An example of this is the Chilean neuroprotection bill, which introduced some restrictions that may be disproportionate with regard to neural data processing in some contexts. So I will stop here for the time being.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm turning to Emma Redmond from OpenAI. We're very happy you are here, Emma, and you are an Associate General Counsel, Head of Privacy and Data Protection at OpenAI. You lead the company's global privacy strategy, which is, I think, can be challenging. But you served as head of OpenAI Ireland in overseeing operation in Ireland. But previously, Emma was global head of privacy and chief privacy officer at Stripe, leading privacy programs at scale in one of the world's most influential fintech companies, and head of international data protection at LinkedIn. Emma is recognized among the 100 top tech people in Ireland. Emma, what is your daily work? Of course, OpenAI is one of the most talked of company, and LLMs is one of the most innovative technology. But of course, obviously, as any new technology, it has some privacy implications. So what are you doing to mitigate this?
So first off, thanks so much for having me. CPDP is one of my favorite events because I think there's a great chance for everyone to go deeper into issues and have those conversations. Does that sound okay? Okay. So first off, in answer to your question directly, it's a busy day, and every day is different, I will say. But what a privilege it is for me to be part of this phenomenon. And when I think back to November 2022, when I suppose for us it really kicked off, it was also a surprise to us in terms of how that phenomenon took off so fast and so quickly. And, you know, as Marcello was talking there, it really, and all of the speakers here, it really struck me in terms of the common theme that they were all trying to get to, which is this is a phenomenon like no other we have probably seen in our lifetime. And we need to ensure that innovation happens. It needs to happen. But obviously, it has to be balanced with that responsibility. And that is the common theme for all of us and what everyone is trying to achieve and strive for. And that's not easy. Anything worth really fighting for and pursuing, it's never easy, is it, in anything that we have in life? But of course, in this case, it is absolutely worth it. When Marcello was talking about, there was a word that came to mind. He mentioned the term, readability a few times. And you take that notion and you take of, the term ability. And for me, where I sit, the ability for someone with low to no vision to be able to have an independent life using the Be My Eyes app that we partner with, so they can understand when their milk is expiring in the fridge. They know what ingredients they have. They know when they go to the gym, the elliptical machine is on the right, the running machine is on the left. This is transformative. You have farmers in Kenya being able to increase their crops by 38%. You have Moderna in terms of the drug trials, like really, really cutting times here. This is truly transformative. But the context is very, very important in terms of how that is being implemented and what problem you're trying to solve for. That is literally what happens day to day and how we like to think about it as well. Marcello also talked about this notion of urgency and delays. And I think that's a really important point, because I don't think that's necessarily been highlighted enough. This is extremely fast. And so what you have to do at the same time is take that muscle that you've created under GDPR and see how you can be creative in that sense. And I will say, actually, and I think it's fantastic to hear all of the great work that's been done in terms of Convention 108 plus, etc. And you look at, as well, the European Data Protection Board report, which gives you actually, a license to be creative as regards how you're going to actually implement privacy in that space. And I think that's something we really should be focusing on even more, and that's something we definitely are, and I can speak to that in a minute. We are at a pivotal moment. It's not a case that, in terms of privacy protection, it happens at X time in the future. Absolutely not. For us, I suppose we started off back in 2015, a very small research and development company that no one really wanted to talk to, frankly, and now here we are. But what's never changed, though, is that notion that I still get to work with those researchers and those developers. And what they do every day is quite incredible. And I would say that, you look at any science experiment you would have done in the past in school, where you have to write up your report and you have to send it, and we all remember, we all had to do it. But that rigor and that diligence has never gone away. And that has always been there. I would refer you to our model cards. It's a great read, a nighttime read. I would say it's a daytime read. But it is lengthy and it is technical. But I would absolutely encourage people to take a look, to take a read, to get a feel of what's involved on the technical side. AI doesn't behave, I would say, like traditional data processing systems. We talked about there, and it was mentioned in terms of how the brain works. And it is, excuse the pun, modeled on the brain, so to speak. But I think it's about rethinking privacy in this new intelligence age. So what that means essentially is, you're taking the if I take an example of, and Carl, you referred to it as well in terms of, the layers of protection and the multi-layers that are in place. So if you take, the first filtration of data from training sets, you take the second filtration, you take the third filtration, you take deduplication, you take the broad de-identification, you take the red teaming, and I could go on and on and on and on, and imagine the longest recipe in the world. That's the amount of layers you're talking about. Those layers, perhaps you wouldn't have put into the bucket of privacy by design, but actually you bring it into the world of the new intelligence age, and you take that license that the EDPB has given and that the GDPR has given, and you say, actually, this is some of the strongest most profound privacy by design methods you can have, because it's there from the start, from cradle to grave. And that is a very important concept in terms of this new technology, but using what we have and that muscle that we have to create that privacy by design in its raw form. And I think that's something that's, quite exciting, and you can see how maybe those elements can be applied in different areas that may not be LLMs, for example. So I think it's really important to think about it in that way. It is about having a more deeper, more nuanced conversation about what privacy means in this new intelligence age. And context is king. We always say context is king. Again, what problem are you trying to solve for? What is that LLM doing for you? And in that context, what does privacy mean in that sphere? And I think that's really important to consider and to have that mindset, because it is all evolving. But this is about a design philosophy all the time. And it is hard for those who are just being introduced to the AI world and trying to figure out how it actually works in the first place, and secondly, how you can actually apply these fantastic methods. So these are the challenges that we're facing. I think there's, when you look at something traditionally like data minimization, as an example, it's a cornerstone concept of privacy, but it's no way different or less profound when you consider, again, that multi-layered approach that is constantly being applied at the AI stage. So I genuinely think that's something very exciting. In terms of our, I suppose, privacy perspectives, you have to look at the true innovation that's happening, of course. And it is not lost on me every day in terms of the stories that I hear and what's actually happening. I mentioned a few there in terms of Be My Eyes, mentioned digital green. We saw the robot there in terms of, I was immediately imagining my massive laundry basket and how incredible that could be. And I think we were all getting secretly very excited at that. But I think it's more, in terms of the day-to-day, the student who, has difficulty, understanding maths. So your custom maths tutor, and the huge door that opens and confidence that gives to someone is phenomenal. Government of Iceland, actually, we were absolutely privileged to partner with them for a language that they feared was diminishing, and to be able to work with them and partner with them such that chat, that GPT essentially comes out with the exact Icelandic translation in local language, not borrowing from any other language, just Icelandic, and what that means for them and their culture is pretty unbelievable. Even to catching halibut with ChatGPT, which I know is probably a bit of a stretch, you think, but no, it's apparently making waves, excuse the pun. But I suppose all of this speaks to, how we have to think about this and the context within which it arises. We often say that sometimes, AI in this sphere and LLMs may turn out to be like, the transistor economically. A big scientific discovery that scales so well and seeps into almost every corner of the economy. But we don't think much about transistors, do we? Or transistor companies. But we expect our TVs to work very, very well. We would expect our laptops to work very, very well. And so there's that expectation that we have as users as well, as time goes on. Life will mostly go on in the same way in 2025 as it did in 2024, albeit potentially more efficient because of LLMs. But how we have to think about this is in terms of the future and coming at us at a speed that we've probably never seen before. And I think that's what, in terms of the work that's been done by Muriel and Anna-Marie and Convention 108 Plus, that's what makes it so fundamental and so key that we are not retrofitting, but reimagining what we currently have in terms of principles and proposals and laws and regulations and codes, and how that can actually fit within that sphere. But it's not easy, and it's not straightforward. And that goes back to the genuine discussions that need to have, as you mentioned, with stakeholders, etc. And something we've been very privileged to be a part of. So, as we know, AGI is on the minds of a lot of people, and there's a lot of talk about AGI and when we get to AGI. Clearly, it has the potential to amplify human capabilities, but the goal isn't to pause progress when you get there. And I think that's important. Again, Marcello talked about that in terms of the urgency and delays and that fear that's there. It's to get it right. And I think that's where having those conversations, and we talk about that a lot, about conversations, but that should not be underestimated, how crucial and how key that actually is as we move forward so fast and so quickly. We've seen, even in the world of agents, the changes that have come about there, and that's about to come. Having your own software engineering agent right beside you, having your own personal assistant. So, conscious of time, I would just say in terms of really key takeaways. One, I think it's important to reimagine privacy going forward in the AI sphere, because it's not, it doesn't act necessarily in the same way as traditional data processing systems. So, so I think that's extremely important. The second, obviously, embracing that innovation. The AI's potential spans across science, across healthcare, across neurotechnology, as we've talked about, across education, art, public services, and so on. It is taking transformation to a whole new level. Very privileged to be a part of that, and I see that every day. And finally, it's about adapting continuously, all the time, every day. Our own frameworks have to evolve all the time to keep up with the pace in terms of what's happening, even for us. But thankfully, I suppose, we have the muscle because of where we started from back in 2015, from those researchers and those scientists who I suppose know no different in terms of how to go about that. But I think there's no reason why others in that space, of course, can't apply that same mindset and that same theory. So again, that's why I mentioned definitely our model cards and system cards are a great read. So look, in conclusion, as we stand at this intersection, I suppose, of history, because it is history, and modern innovation, let us embrace those challenges and those opportunities and those responsibilities, but really think about, that term that I mentioned earlier, that readability, that ability piece, and what we have in our hands right now. The ability in terms of innovation, but the ability in terms of being responsible as regards how we work with it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. We have 10 more minutes. I will ask one question to the panelists. It's already been very rich interventions, and I think all of you agreed, or at least hasn't objected, that there is a place for international regulation, and there is also work that has to be carried out by international organization in terms of human rights and new technologies. And there has been also a lot of other work that have been mentioned that are that have been carried out in research sector, in industry, in the businesses, in your companies, in regulatory authorities such as EDPB or data protection authorities. But what do you think? What would be your recommendation, also taking into account that we have really unimaginable potential, but also heightened challenges with new technologies? What would be your recommendation? How we should go forward to in designing international standards that takes into account all of what you have been doing in your respective work, in your respective area, or in your organizational company? And what would be then the best way to implement those standards? So because we, of course, can have discussions on specific ways, like methodology or blueprint developed, but how we ensure that they will be implemented all across the globe. That would be my question. So, what do you think? Please.
Just very quickly, I'll say here that I think when you look to regulate in a specific space, it's just very important that you understand the tech you're regulating, you understand the areas and the actual problem sets which you're trying to get ahead of. I think it was mentioned by one of the panelists earlier on, there are a number of very forward-leaning legislative proposals and actions which have taken place across the globe. So we see, I think, in the US, we have Colorado, California, who have written in neural data as a sensitive data, but there's a different optionality there around an opt-in versus an opt-out. You have Chile in the constitutional change which was made there, introducing neuro rights, which is I think a very, it's a jump a little bit on the spectrum as to how this may be dealt with. I wanted to just show those two different perspectives because it's really important to get this right. I mean, we've seen, of course, different areas of development of technology, such as social media. We have now AI, and it's just very, very important that we regulate it correctly and sensibly, which enables innovation. Regulation for its own ends isn't necessarily a good thing. I mean, you can accidentally hamper and hinder and hamstring some of the regulation that you want to achieve. And we heard from panelists earlier on that within, let's just pick outside of consumer, let's pick just medical arena, you really have the ability to have extremely consequential changes for the lives of individuals. So we want to make sure that's enabled, and I think that takes place through partnership. I'll just very quickly plug that we've always seen that broad concepts and principles baked into existing legislation such as GDPR, fairness, transparency, all of these exist, and you'll have seen doubtlessly the discussions that happen where people are extolling the virtues of GDPR as a sensible place upon which to base your principal development, including the AI Act. And I think with the prohibited processes, with the Article 5, Article 12, lots of the existing provisions of GDPR, I think that provides a sensible place for companies, especially Microsoft, to continue to do the work we've been doing on a responsible AI standard and making sure privacy by designs, all of our data protection impact assessments, our data minimization, all of that continues to be baked into the full AI risk life cycle. But I think the legislation is there, and we shouldn't rush to get more words on a page which may incorrectly regulate.
Yeah, just to highlight what you said, Carl, that I think is really critical. Education and understanding in terms of how this works is critical, because if you don't have that, you cannot assess how a code is going to work or how transparency is going to work. And it sounds like a very obvious point, but I think truly understanding how it works is critical, number one, and the education piece. And two, again, endorsing that, understanding the problem you're actually trying to solve for. Because if you're trying to solve for absolutely everything in one space, it's questionable whether that's going to be a success. And the third thing I would just say is, incentivizing, I think, certification and transparency in some way and codes is something that I think can be explored a lot more. When you look at GDPR and you look at the code option there, that's something that could definitely be enhanced more. But I think this notion of incentivizing certifications and such like. But again, same thing. I mean, we've been involved in the AI Pact, the code, and so on, and it's been a tremendous work ethic, to get to that point. But in order to do it, you have to understand, and you have to know what problem you're trying to solve for to get to that point. So,
Muriel?
Yeah, I would push the understanding element of governance further, thinking in terms of having not only education, which equates to mass education, equates to oversimplification sometimes. And I would imagine an adaptable tool that is based on observation, where there's really at the outset, in order to understand the problem, you have this adaptable and soft framework where you can create observatories in order to see what's the impact of what I showed, what it doesn't mean for a person and the privacy of a person of aggregating multimodally everything that is inside her iPhone, or, you know, and we could have this understanding of what is at stake and what is important, having a kind of observatories that are helping not only understand but also bring people that have the technical background to work together with business stakeholder in order to create this new way of understanding privacy when you are immersed into AI calculations, and where sensors that you have around that can help you are also sensors that imply monitoring. And so that would be an operable way in order to have this first a deep understanding of the question to lead to governance, and second, a dialogue that lead to governance. So this could help actually to have understanding as governance and dialogue as governance at the outset before putting on the paper.
Anyone else from the panel? Or I would also want to turn to the, yeah, Marcello?
No, just if I may, I would just like to share a couple of thoughts. One, I think it's a very important point that was raised by Emma on the importance of education, because as we all know, many of the privacy challenges that we're facing in the digital space emerge out of the a lack of knowledge that most of the world population had about the importance and value of their digitally recordable behavioral data. I think we have very valid reasons to suspect that most people will have an even lower understanding about the value of their brain data, and how much information can be revealed from their brain activity. So as soon as consumer neurotechnologies will become mainstream, and I believe we are not far from there. From that point of time, we really need to face the importance of digital literacy about neural data as a prerequisite for mental self-determination. And the second point is that when we talk about regulation of neurotechnology, we should really be cautioned against developing another domain-specific regulation that operates in silos. Because I think, as it appeared clearly in this panel, neurotech and AI are converging and hybridizing to a large extent. So this is really part of a broader phenomenon of technological convergence. And I think it's very important that we address these new challenges in a holistic manner, because the potential for revealing sensitive information about mental states is definitely amplified by neurotech, but it's not something completely new, right? So we already have that problem in the context of things like affective computing or face recognition AI. So it's very important that we maintain a holistic angle for oversight and governance.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, our time is up. I learned a lot during this panel. Thank you so much for the panelists. Thank you for the rich exchanges. Please join me thanking the panelists. Bye.